The fog came down Poor Fork Hollow the way it always did in late October, low and thick as wool, settling into the cut timber and the gravel driveways until you couldn't see your own mailbox from the porch. It was the kind of fog that made sound carry strange. A dog barking 3 ridges over might as well be in your yard, and a truck on Route 421 could rumble for 10 minutes before you saw its headlights. Elias Pritchard stood on his porch at 5:30 in the morning, coffee going cold in a chipped mug, watching nothing but white. The temperature had dropped to 41 overnight. His breath joined the fog. Somewhere down the hill, a CB radio crackled. Someone calling for a jump start. No answer coming back. The coal jobs were gone. The radios mostly talked to themselves now. Behind him, the screen door opened soft. Ada didn't say good morning. She set a hand on his shoulder, left it there 3 seconds, then went back inside. 34 years married, and she could say more in 3 seconds than most preachers managed in an hour. Elias took another sip. The coffee tasted like the well water it was made from. Metallic, honest, unforgiving. He looked at the woodpile stacked against the north side of the house. 2 winters' worth if they were careful. 1 winter if they weren't. The Pritchard home place had been in the family since 1891. A 73-acre patch of ridge and hollow, with a creek that ran cold year-round, and a stand of poplar his grandfather had refused to sell, even when the loggers came with cash in hand. Now, the bank wanted it. Not because the Pritchards were lazy, not because they'd missed payments out of spite or carelessness, because a man named Tanner Wilkes had made a promise in June and broken it in September, and 19 other men had helped him do it. Elias had met Tanner Wilkes in the parking lot of the Harlan County Courthouse on a Tuesday in late spring. Wilkes drove a new Silverado with chrome running boards and a CB antenna tall enough to scrape low branches. He wore a quilted vest over a button-down and shook hands like a man running for office. "You, Elias Pritchard?" "I am. Heard you got trucks. Heard you got boys who know how to drive them." Elias waited. A man who starts with flattery usually ends with his hand in your pocket. Wilkes leaned against the Silverado's bed and pulled out a folded piece of paper. A contract, he called it, though it looked more like something typed on a Smith Corona in somebody's kitchen. "I got coal moving out of Leslie County all winter. Need 5 families with trucks and the grit to run them. You front the fuel, the maintenance, the tires. I'll get you onto the routes. Pay comes every 2 weeks, cash or check, your choice. Enough to carry you through till the big operations start hiring again." "Why us?" Elias asked. Wilkes smiled. "Because you're still here. Half the county ran off to Knoxville or Cincinnati. You stayed. That tells me you're serious." Elias took the paper, read it slow. The terms were simple. The Pritchards would provide 2 trucks, cover operating costs up front, and receive payment based on tonnage hauled. Wilkes's company, Poor Fork Logistics, LLC, would handle contracts, scales, and depot access. First payment due October 15th. "What's the guarantee?" Elias asked. Wilkes tapped the paper. "My name, and Boyd Ayer's name. He's the yard foreman at the Grigsby Depot. Won't let a truck roll without his say-so. He vouched for me. I'm vouching for you." Elias looked at the signature line, Boyd Ayers. He knew the name, a man with a reputation for taking envelopes under tables and looking the other way when weights came up short. "I'll think on it." "Don't think too long," Wilkes said. "Winter doesn't wait." Elias brought the contract home and laid it on the kitchen table. Ada read it twice, lips moving slightly, then looked up at her husband. "You trust him?" "No." "Then why are you considering it?" Elias didn't answer right away. He looked around the kitchen, the propane stove they'd bought used in 1979, the linoleum with the worn path from sink to table, the jars of green beans and tomatoes lining the shelves, Ada's summer work, her insurance against hunger. Through the doorway, he could see the living room where his father had died in a recliner, looking out at the ridge, refusing to go to a hospital in town. "Because I don't see another way," Elias said finally. Ada folded the paper and handed it back. "Then we'll do it, but we'll do it with our eyes open." Elias's sons came home that Sunday after church. Ruth arrived first, driving a '79 Impala with a rear bumper held on by baling wire. She worked 3 days a week at the clinic in Cumberland. making $7 an hour wrapping wounds and checking vitals. She had a boy, Caleb, 9 years old, whose father had left for Ohio when the child was 2 and never sent a letter. Jonah came next, on foot, walking up from the trailer he rented a mile down the road. He'd been a brakeman on the L&N rail line until the coal train stopped running regular. Now, he picked up odd jobs, repairing fences, clearing brush, sitting with old men who didn't want to die alone. Jacob pulled in driving a Dodge pickup that sounded like a lawnmower with pneumonia. He was a mechanic by trade and temperament, the kind of man who could listen to an engine and tell you what was failing before you popped the hood. He'd been married once, briefly, to a woman who got tired of waiting for better days. Mark, the youngest, came last, riding a Honda motorcycle he'd rebuilt from 2 wrecks. He had a high school diploma and a head for numbers, maps, and patterns. He tried community college in Pikeville but ran out of money halfway through the first semester. They sat around the kitchen table, and Elias laid out the situation. Wilkes is offering winter work, hauling coal. We need to front costs, fuel, tires, repairs. If it works, we make enough to hold the place and get through spring. If it doesn't, he didn't finish. They all knew what the bank letter said. 30 days past due, foreclosure proceedings to begin November 1st. What do we have to put up? Jacob asked. Everything, Elias said. I'll sell the sawmill equipment. We'll pull from savings. We'll buy retreads on credit from Benny Combs. Diesel, we'll get in drums from the co-op. Ruth looked at her mother. What do you think, Mama? Ada's hands were folded on the table. She didn't look up. I think when a man promises you winter in June, you better make sure he's not selling you snow that'll melt. But there wasn't another option on the table. They all knew it. Jonah spoke quietly. I'll drive. Mark can ride with me, handle the paperwork. Jacob nodded. I'll keep the trucks running, Ruth said. I'll keep the books. Make sure we know what we're owed. Elias signed the contract the next morning. Tanner Wilkes shook his hand, smiling that vote for me smile, and said, You won't regret this. They spent the summer preparing. Elias sold the sawmill equipment to a man in Bell County for $2,800. A third of what it was worth, but cash money talks when you're on a clock. Jacob rebuilt 2 carburetors and replaced a transmission. Ruth made a ledger in a spiral notebook, listing every dollar spent. Retreads from Benny Combs, $420. Diesel drums, $630. Maintenance parts, $215. Fees and permits, $190. By October, they were into the work for $3,400 they didn't have. The first loads were supposed to roll October 7th. October 7th came. Jonah drove to the Grigsby Depot at dawn, paperwork in hand. Boyd Ayers was there, leaning against a loading dock, smoking a Marlboro. Where's Wilkes? Jonah asked. Ayers shrugged. Ain't seen him? We're supposed to start today. Can't start without his say-so. He handles the contracts. Jonah waited 3 hours. Wilkes never showed. He drove home and told his father. Elias called the number on the contract. It rang 14 times. No answer. October 15th came and went. No payment, no Wilkes, no loads. Ruth drove to the courthouse to file a complaint. Deputy Cason Monroe took the paper, glanced at it, and set it on a stack 6 inches high. We'll look into it, he said. When? Monroe smiled, thin, polite, empty. When we get to it. Ruth saw him 2 days later in the courthouse parking lot, climbing into a truck with new mud tires and a wax shine. She wrote down the plate number in the margin of her clinic notepad, though she didn't know yet what she'd do with it. October 21st, the certified letter arrived. The bank was accelerating the foreclosure timeline. Payment due in full by November 15th, or the property would go to auction. Elias sat at the table and did the math in his head. They had $900 in the account. They owed the bank $4,200. They owed Benny Combs. They owed the co-op. They owed the man who'd refilled their propane tank in September on a promise. Ada came into the kitchen and found him there, hands flat on the table, staring at a knot in the wood. We'll figure it out, she said. There's nothing to figure. Then we'll ask the church. Elias looked up at her, and for the first time in 34 years, she saw something in his face that scared her. Not anger, worse. A cold, settled certainty. I'm not asking anyone for anything, he said quietly. The next Sunday, Ruth brought Caleb to the house. The boy had been coughing for a week, and now he was running a fever. Ada touched his forehead and looked at Ruth. He needs a doctor. I know. You got the money for it? Ruth shook her head. Ada opened her purse and pulled out 3 $20 bills, grocery money, set aside from her church envelope work. She handed it to Ruth. Get him the medicine. We'll eat what we got. That night, Ada stood at the stove, stirring a pot of soup made from a ham bone, 3 potatoes, and an onion. Elias came in from the porch and stood in the doorway. I counted the jars, Ada said without turning around. We got enough to make it through January, if we're careful. After that, we'll need cash for flour and cornmeal. Elias said nothing. Ada set down the spoon and turned to face him. What are you thinking? I'm thinking about names. What names? The men who did this. Ada studied him. 34 years, and she knew the look. She'd seen it once before, in 1971, when a man tried to cheat them on a land sale, and Elias had driven to his house and stood on the porch until the man came out and made it right. How many names? She asked. Elias pulled a marbled composition book from the shelf, one Jonah had used in high school, half the pages still blank. He sat at the table and began to write. Ada watched over his shoulder as the list grew. Tanner Wilkes, Boyd Ayers, Deputy Cason Monroe, a loan officer named Phelps, the cousins who'd sold them counterfeit bills of sale for a load they'd never received, a night clerk who'd tipped off a competitor about their fuel purchase, driving the price up, 3 men who worked as enforcers for Wilkes, collecting fees with brass knuckles when drivers balked, a wrecker driver who skimmed, a notary who'd blessed bad titles, a way station man on the take, a brother-in-law who laundered Wilkes' fuel receipts, a courier, a tipster, a county clerk, a driver who'd ghosted hours and blamed the Pritchards. 19 names. Ada's hand went to her mouth. Elias, he looked up at her. His face was calm. His voice was steady. They broke the code, Ada. A man's word used to mean something here. You shake hands, you honor it. You take a man's money, you do the work. You don't laugh at him on the courthouse steps while he loses his father's land. What are you going to do? Elias closed the book. He didn't answer right away. Outside, the fog was rolling in again, turning the hollow into a bowl of silence. Somewhere a dog barked. Somewhere a truck door slammed. The sounds carried, distorted, unanchored. I'm going to talk to the boys, he said. They came after dark on a Tuesday. Elias had called each of them separately, told them to come quiet, told them not to bring anyone else. Ruth left Caleb with a neighbor. Jonah walked. Jacob drove, but parked at the bottom of the hill. Mark came on the Honda, killed the engine a quarter mile out, and coasted in. They sat in the living room. Ada brought coffee and cornbread, set it on the table, and left. She didn't need to hear it said aloud. Elias opened the composition book and laid it flat. These are the men who stole from us. Some of them took money. Some of them took time. Some of them took the law and bent it till it broke. All of them knew what they were doing. He let them read the list. No one spoke. Finally, Jonah said, "What do you want us to do?" Elias looked at each of his children in turn. Ruth, who'd given up college to raise a boy alone. Jonah, who'd worked every dirty job the mountains offered and never complained. Jacob, who drank to forget the mine that crippled his friends and still showed up every morning. Mark, who was smarter than all of them and stayed anyway because blood mattered. I want us to do what the law won't, Elias said. I want us to make sure these men understand that you don't break a mountain family and walk away. Ruth's voice was quiet. You're talking about hurting people. I'm talking about justice. That's not justice, Daddy. That's vengeance. Elias looked at her. When the law's 40 miles away, and it won't come when you call, what's the difference? Mark leaned forward, elbows on his knees. How many of these men you think would lose sleep if we lost the house? If Mama went hungry? If Caleb couldn't get medicine? Ruth didn't answer. Jacob spoke for the first time. What's the plan? Elias reached under his chair and pulled out a wooden box, old and scarred, the kind that used to hold shotgun shells. Inside were maps, topographic surveys, logging road tracings, water charts from the county extension office. Beneath them, a stack of notes in Ruth's handwriting, times, routes, habits. Where did you get those? Ruth whispered. You write things down at the clinic, Elias said. You hear things. I just put them in order. She stared at her own handwriting. Insurance adjuster, Wednesdays, stops at the diner in Lynch. Loan officer Phelps, Fridays, drives Route 119 to see his sister. Deputy Monroe, night shift, parks behind the old schoolhouse to use the phone. I didn't write those for this, Ruth said. I know, but here they are. Jonah picked up one of the maps. You've been planning this a while. Since the day Monroe smiled at your sister and did nothing. Mark looked at the list again, counting silently. 19 men, Daddy. That's not a fight, that's a war. Elias nodded. It is, and we'll fight it the way Mountain. People always have. Quiet, fast, and final. Jacob set down his coffee. What are the rules? Elias had thought about that. He'd thought about it every night for 3 weeks, lying beside Ada, listening to her breathe, knowing she was awake too. No women, no children, no one who didn't have a hand in this. No guns? Jonah asked. Guns make noise. Noise makes witnesses. We use what we have. Tools, roads, the land itself. We make it look like weather, like bad luck, like the mountain taking what the mountain takes. Ruth stood up. I can't be part of this. Elias didn't argue. Then don't be. Go home. Take care of Caleb. Forget we talked. She stood there, hand on the back of the chair, looking at the list. She thought about the deputy's smile. She thought about the banker's letter. She thought about choosing between medicine and food. She sat back down. If we do this, we do it smart. No sloppiness, no evidence, no confessions, even to each other, ever. Elias looked at Ada in the doorway. She met his eyes, nodded once, and turned away. There's one more thing, Elias said. He pulled a second sheet from the composition book, names written in pencil, not ink. These are men I'm not sure about yet. Men who might have been part of it, might not. I'm going to watch them a little longer. Mark leaned over. How many? Elias folded the paper and dropped it into the stove. It caught, curled, turned black. Doesn't matter now. He closed the composition book and set it in the center of the table. We start this weekend. 5 trucks, 2 nights, 3 counties. Each man falls different. Water, earth, steel, no pattern, no trail. Jonah looked at the maps. Who goes first? Elias tapped a name. Boyd Ayers, the foreman, the one who started it. Jacob asked the question they were all thinking. What about Wilkes? Elias was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was cold as the October fog. We save him for last. I want him to hear the names. I want him to know we're coming. They left one by one. The way they'd come. Ruth drove home in the Impala, hands shaking on the wheel, telling herself she could still back out. Jonah walked down the gravel road, counting his steps, slowing his breathing, becoming the kind of still a man needs when he's about to do something he can't undo. Jacob sat in his truck for 10 minutes, engine off, staring at his hands that had built things, fixed things, and now would break things. Mark rode the Honda fast, wind cold on his face, thinking about maps and rivers and how a man could vanish if you knew the right roads. Elias stood on the porch and watched them disappear into the fog. Ada came out, stood beside him, said nothing. You think I'm wrong? He asked. I think you're a man who's run out of choices. That's not an answer. Ada looked at him. No, it's not. Inside, the stove ticked as it cooled. The coffee cup sat unwashed. The composition book lay closed on the table, 19 names inside, waiting. Elias walked to the shelf and pulled down his father's Winchester Model 70, the one that had taken deer for 40 years, and never missed. He checked the action, smooth and certain, then put it back. He wouldn't need it. The mountain would do the work. All he had to do was ask it the right way. The first rule, Elias laid down, was written in pencil on the back of a feed store receipt and burned in the stove before anyone left the house. Use only what we already own. It was Wednesday, October 25th. They had 9 days. Elias spread the maps across the kitchen table after Ada had gone to bed. She didn't need to see the details, didn't need to carry the specifics. What she knew, she knew. What she didn't, she couldn't tell, even by accident. Jacob sat to his left, Jonah to his right. Mark stood at the counter, notepad open, pencil moving. Ruth sat near the stove, far enough away to pretend she wasn't part of it, close enough to hear every word. We don't buy anything new for 30 days, Elias said. No guns, no rope, no tools, no fuel cans. Nothing that puts our name on a receipt between now and Thanksgiving. What if we need something we don't have? Jacob asked. Then we don't do that part of the plan. Mark looked up from his notepad. What about fuel? We'll burn through what we have. We buy it the way we always do. 10 gallons here, 15 there, spread across 3 counties. Cash, different stations, no pattern. Jonah tapped the map. What about the trucks? They see a Pritchard truck in the wrong place at the wrong time. That's a problem. Then we don't take our trucks. We walk. We use the Honda. We borrow. Elias looked at Mark. Your bike got plates? Not current. Good. Keep it that way. Ruth spoke from the stove. You're going to need to know where these men are, when they move, when they're alone. Elias turned to her. That's why I need you. I already told you. I'm not asking you to do anything but what you already do. Go to work. Listen. Write down what you hear. Insurance adjusters like to talk. So do deputies' girlfriends when they're waiting for a prescription. Ruth's jaw tightened, but she didn't argue. She'd been writing things down for weeks without knowing why. Now she knew. Elias stood and walked to the corner of the kitchen where a gun cabinet stood. Scratched and dented, the lock broken since 1977. Inside, 2 Winchester Model 70s in 30-06, a Savage 110 in 270, a Marlin 30-30 lever action, a Ruger 357 revolver, and 3 12-gauge pumps, a Remington 870, a Mossberg 500, and an old Stevens single shot that had belonged to his father. These are what we have, Elias said, all registered or grandfathered, nothing new, nothing traced to a purchase in the last 5 years. We using them? Jacob asked. Only if we have to. And if we do, we don't leave brass. We don't fire twice in the same county. We don't use anything but what's already in the box. He pulled a shoebox from the bottom of the cabinet. Deer slugs, double-aught buckshot, birdshot, 30-06 hunting rounds and soft point. This is the only ammunition we touch. After this, we stop shooting. No practice, no hunting. We go quiet. Mark wrote it down. No new ammo, no range time, no witnesses to capability. Elias opened the cabinet below the guns. Inside, a different kind of inventory. Come along winches, logging chain, tow straps, a hand-cranked chain hoist, pry bars, a splitting maul, a 2-man crosscut saw, fence stretchers, surveyor stakes, a kerosene lantern, black plastic sheeting folded in squares, a box of road flares, and a coil of snare wire. This is what matters, Elias said. Every man on that list drives somewhere. Every man stops somewhere. Every man trusts a road he's driven 100 times. He pulled out a topo map of Harlan, Letcher, and Bell counties, the kind the Forest Service handed out free. Red pencil marks dotted the ridges and hollows. Poor Fork, Kingdom Come Creek, Bone Hollow, the strip pits above Lynch, the old Grigsby Depot. These are places where a man can disappear, and it looks like gravity. Jonah leaned closer. You've already scouted them. I have. When? Every Sunday after church for the last month. I told your mother I was visiting graves. Elias tapped a mark on the map. This is where Boyd Ayers parks his truck when he's checking loads. The gravel's soft. The dock's rotted where the drainage meets the fill. If the weight shifts wrong, it'll go. Mark looked up. You're going to make it shift. I'm going to make it easy for the shift to happen. Ruth spoke quietly. That's still killing. Elias turned to her. It's engineering. Same thing Jacob does when he rebuilds a transmission. Same thing you do when you wrap a wound and know it won't hold. That's different. Is it? They spent Thursday in silence, each of them working alone, thinking through their part. Jacob went to the tool shed and took inventory. 2 floor jacks, a set of jack stands, 4 hydraulic bottle jacks, a creeper, a socket set, and a timing light. He cleaned each one, tested the jacks under the bed of his Dodge, then put everything back exactly where it had been. He didn't write anything down. He didn't need to. Jonah walked the roads. He started at dawn and didn't come back until dusk, covering 23 miles on foot, Route 421 to Poor Fork, up Kingdom Come Road to the Old Mine Cut, down through Bone Hollow to the pond behind the Renfro place, then back along the ridgeline. He noted which dogs barked, which gates squeaked, which bridges had loose boards, and which curves had no gravel on the shoulder. He didn't carry a camera. He carried a memory that had learned in rail yards how to see a thing once and hold it forever. Mark spread maps on the floor of his bedroom and traced routes in 3 colors: blue for water, brown for earth, red for road. He marked elevation changes, culverts, cattle guards, overlooks, and turnarounds. He timed distances, using his Timex and his bike. 14 minutes from the Pritchard place to the Grigsby depot, 9 minutes from the depot to the strip pit, 18 minutes from the strip pit to the pond, 6 minutes from the pond to the old schoolhouse where Deputy Monroe parked at night. He wrote times in the margins, then burned the paper and redrew it from memory. Ruth went to work at the clinic and listened. She heard that loan officer Phelps drove to Lynch every Friday to see his sister, always stopping at the diner for pie. She heard that the wrecker driver, Clyde Dutton, fished the Renfro Pond on Saturdays, always alone, always before dawn. She heard that Deputy Monroe had been seeing a woman in Cumberland, a cashier at the Food City, and that he called her from the payphone at the old school because his wife checked the phone bill. Ruth wrote nothing down at work. She waited until she got home, then transferred it to the notepad in her purse, the one she kept under the seat of the Impala. Friday night, they gathered again. This time, Ada stayed in the room. She sat in the recliner by the window, hands folded, listening. Elias laid out the sequence. We do this over 2 nights, Friday and Saturday, 3 counties, 19 men. We make each one look different. Bad luck, bad weather, bad choices. Why 2 nights? Ruth asked. Because 1 night makes it look like a plan. 3 nights gives someone time to notice and move. 2 nights makes it look like October. Mark nodded. What's the order? Elias pulled the composition book from his jacket and opened it. We start with the foreman, Boyd Ayers. He's the gatekeeper. Without him, Wilkes couldn't have stalled us. How? Jacob asked. Loading dock at Grigsby. You've been there. The east side's built on fill over a drainage cut. The boards are soft. The gravel's barely holding. If a truck backs onto it too hard, it'll go. So we make him back onto it too hard. We make him think he has a reason to. Jonah spoke. What reason? Elias looked at Mark. You're going to call him on the CB. Tell him there's a pallet of remolded tires sitting behind the Grigsby dock. Just sitting there. No bill of lading. Tell him if he doesn't grab them tonight, someone else will. He'll bite. He's taken worse for less. What if he brings someone? Then we wait. We do this alone or not at all. Elias moved down the list. Next, the cousins, Ray and Porter Childers. They sold us counterfeit bills of sale for a load that never existed. Cost us $400. Where do we find them? Jonah asked. Kingdom Come Road, Saturday night. They run Shine up to Virginia once a month. Always the last Saturday, always after 10. How do you know that? Because I bought a jar off them in August and asked. Mark smiled despite himself. You set this up 3 months ago. I set up options. I didn't know I'd need them. Ruth's voice was tight. What are you going to do to them? Elias didn't sugarcoat it. There's a curve, just past the old mine cut. Fog pool's heavy there. If the fog's thick enough and the curve's blocked just right, a man braking hard will slide into the ditch. That ditch drops into a shaft that's been open since 1962. The room went silent. Ada's voice came from the recliner, low and steady. The mine that took Lucas Broom and his boy. Yes. That shaft's 100 feet straight down. I know. Ruth stood up. Daddy, that's murder. Elias looked at her. That's a hole that's been waiting 40 years for the county to cap it. I didn't dig it. I didn't put them on that road. I'm just making sure the fog's a little thicker and the road's a little narrower than they remember. And if they see the block and stop, then they turn around and go home, and we try something else. The rest of the list unfolded the same way. Opportunities engineered, hazards amplified. The mountain doing what it had always done, taking men who weren't paying attention. Deputy Monroe, the old schoolhouse, the coal chute, a door that locked from the inside, and a boiler room that hadn't been checked since 1975. The wrecker driver, Clyde Dutton, a pond deep enough to hide a truck, a winch cable rigged to pull instead of hold, and a stranded chassis that wasn't stranded at all. The notary, who'd blessed bad titles, a strip pit with a false ledge, a radiator hose cut just enough to blow at the ridge, and silt that swallowed slow and certain. Loan Officer Phelps and his brother-in-law, a roadside oak, a come-along, a guardrail rotted with kerosene-soaked rags, and gravity. Each death designed to look like the thing the coroner would write on the line, without looking twice. Accidental, driver error, misadventure. Jacob asked the question that mattered. What about evidence? Tire tracks, footprints, fibers. Elias pulled a pair of boots from under the table, worn, generic, bought at a yard sale in Bell County 2 years ago. We wear these, rotate them, burn them after. What about the CB? They'll have records of the handle. Mark uses a handle nobody knows. Sawhorse. One time only. After that, the radio goes in the creek. Jonah looked at the list again. This gets us to 17. What about the last two? Elias closed the book. Tanner Wilkes and a man I'm still confirming. Who? A federal informant who's been feeding Wilkes information on who to target. He's living in his mother's basement in Evarts. I need to make sure before we move. Mark's eyes narrowed. How do you know there's a federal informant? Because Wilkes knew things he shouldn't have known. He knew we'd sold the sawmill equipment. He knew we'd taken out a loan from Phelps. He knew Ruth worked at the clinic and what her hours were. Elias tapped the table. Somebody told him. Somebody with access. Ruth's face went pale. The clinic keeps records. I know. If someone's been looking at them, then we deal with that too. Saturday morning, Elias walked the property line alone. The ridge was covered in oak and poplar. The leaves turned copper and gold, the ground soft with rain that had fallen overnight. He stopped at his father's grave, a flat stone under a hickory tree. No name, just initials and a year, EP 1904-1981. Elias crouched and cleared leaves from the stone. I'm going to do something you wouldn't approve of, he said quietly, but I'm doing it for the same reason you never sold this land. Because a man's word is supposed to mean something. Because family is supposed to matter more than money. He stood, looked down at the hollow where the house sat, smoke rising from the chimney. Ada would be making cornbread. Ruth would be reading to Caleb. Jonah and Jacob would be checking the trucks. Mark would be going over the maps one more time. Elias walked back down the hill. That night they laid everything out on the kitchen floor. The tools, the maps, the list of names. Elias assigned roles. Jonah, you're the wheelman. You get us in and out. No headlights, no brake lights, no noise. Jacob, you're the mechanic. If something needs to break, you make it break clean. If something needs to hold, you make it hold until it doesn't. Mark, you're the navigator. You know the roads. You know the times. You keep us off the paths anyone's watching. Ruth, you're the anchor. You stay here with Mama. You answer the phone if it rings. You're home all weekend. You're visible. You're the alibi. Ruth nodded, though her hands were shaking. Elias looked at each of them. Once we start, we don't stop. Once we commit, we don't second guess. And once it's done, we never speak of it again. Not to each other, not to a preacher, not to God himself, if he comes asking. Ada spoke from the recliner. He already knows. Elias turned to her. The Lord sees what men do in the dark, she said quietly. You don't need to tell him. He's already counting. Then let him count, Elias said. And when he's done, he can judge whether we were right or wrong. But he won't bring back what we've lost. And he won't stop the bank from taking this house. Ada stood, walked to the table, and placed both hands flat on the surface. She looked at the list of 19 names, and for a long moment, no one breathed. I'll pray for you, she said finally. But I won't pray you stop. Sunday, they went to church. All of them. They sat in the fourth pew, same as always. They sang the hymns. They bowed their heads during prayer. When the collection plate came around, Ada put in $5, same as always. Preacher Vance gave a sermon on the book of Judges, about Gideon and the army that defeated the Midianites with trumpets and torches. God doesn't need a big army, he said. He just needs a faithful few. Elias didn't look at his children. He didn't need to. After the service, Deacon Harris stopped Elias on the steps. Heard you had trouble with that hauling contract. We did. Any way the church can help? Elias shook his head. We'll manage. Harris studied him. You let me know if that changes. I will. But they both knew he wouldn't. Monday, Elias walked to the county clerk's office in Harlan and filed a formal complaint against Tanner Wilkes for breach of contract. He did it in daylight, in front of witnesses, with Ruth's ledger as evidence. The clerk took the paperwork, stamped it, and said it would be reviewed within 60 days. That's too long, Elias said. The clerk shrugged. That's the process. Elias thanked her and left. He'd created the paper trail. He'd shown he tried the legal way. When the law failed, and it would, what came next wasn't lawlessness. It was what happened when the law looked away. Tuesday night, Elias gathered his sons one last time. They stood in the barn, where no one could hear, where the CB couldn't reach, where the only witnesses were mice and shadows. Friday and Saturday, Elias said, 2 nights, 19 men. After that, we go back to normal. We work. We wait. We never speak of this again. Jonah looked at his father. What if they come for us? They won't. But if they do, Elias met his son's eyes. Then we were never there. Mark asked the question none of them wanted to answer. What about Wilkes? He's not stupid. When the others start disappearing, he'll know. Good, Elias said. I want him to know. I want him to sit in his Silverado with his chrome running boards and wonder who's next. Jacob's voice was quiet. You want him scared. I want him to understand that when you break a mountain family, the mountain breaks you back. Wednesday, Elias burned the second list, the one with the names he wasn't sure about. The paper curled in the stove, and the names turned to ash. A courthouse secretary who might have passed information, a banker's nephew who might have tipped off Phelps, a trucker who might have skimmed hours. He'd never know if they were guilty, but he knew the 19 were, and that was enough. Thursday, Elias sat on the porch at dawn with his coffee and his father's Bible. He opened it to the book of Micah and read the verse his mother had underlined in pencil 50 years ago. He hath showed thee, O man, what is good. And what doth the Lord require of thee, but to do justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with thy God? He thought about justice. He thought about mercy. He thought about humility. Then he closed the book and went inside to check the Winchester. Friday, October 27th, 1989. Temperature at dusk, 38 degrees. Fog rolling in heavy. Moon dark. Wind still. Elias stood in the barn with Jonah, Jacob, and Mark. They wore the yard sale boots. They carried no phones, no wallets, no identification. The CB radio was set to channel 19. The Honda's plates were covered in mud. The trucks were parked in plain sight at the house, where Ruth would be all night, visible, awake, waiting. Elias looked at his sons. You ready? They nodded. Then let's go ask the mountain for what we're owed. They slipped into the fog, and the fog swallowed them whole. The fog came down like a blanket soaked in kerosene, thick, cold, and carrying the smell of rotting leaves and diesel exhaust. Jonah drove the Honda with the headlight off, Mark riding behind him, both of them leaning into the curves by memory rather than sight. The bike's engine was a low growl, muffled by the wet air, swallowed by the hollow before it could carry. They stopped a quarter mile from the Grigsby depot and killed the engine. Silence rushed in, the kind that makes you hear your own heartbeat, the kind that swallows footsteps and words, and anything a man might want to take back. Mark dismounted and pulled the CB handset from his jacket. Channel 19. He keyed the mic once, waited, then spoke in a voice flat and low, stripped of anything that might identify him later. Breaker 19 for any eastbound ears. Got a tip on some Remold sitting behind the Grigsby dock. No paperwork, no tags. Sitting pretty if you got a truck and a reason. He released the key. Static hissed. 30 seconds. A minute. Then a voice crackled back, rough with cigarettes and 60-hour weeks. This is Boyd. Where'd you hear that? Mark didn't answer. He powered off the CB, wrapped it in a plastic bag, and tucked it into his jacket. They wouldn't use it again. After tonight, it would go into Poor Fork Creek with a cinder block tied to the antenna. Jonah tapped his shoulder. They moved, 10:14 p.m. Grigsby Depot, Harlan County. The depot sat at the end of a gravel road that hadn't seen county maintenance since 1984. It was a flat-roofed cinder-block building with a loading dock on the east side and a yard full of rusted pallets, oil drums, and a scale house that leaned like it was drunk. The loading dock had been built in the 50s over a drainage cut, a 10-foot drop into a culvert that ran under the road and fed into a creek 100 yards downhill. Jacob was already there, lying flat on the gravel beneath the dock's edge. He'd arrived 2 hours earlier, walking in from the north through the timber, moving slow and low, a shadow among shadows. He had a pry bar, a ball-peen hammer, and a come-along winch. The dock's support beams were 6x6 timbers, treated once in 1956 and never again. Jacob had checked them a week ago, soft as cork on the downhill side, where water pooled and rot set in. He didn't need to cut them, he just needed to help them along. He'd loosened the bolts on the beam nearest the edge, back them out 3 full turns, then tap them back in finger tight so they'd look whole from above. The gravel he'd raked into a gentle slope, smooth enough to hide the drop, loose enough to give when weight pushed. Now, he waited. At 10:23, headlights swept the fog. A Chevy flatbed with a winch bumper and a toolbox rusted through on the passenger side. Boyd Ayers climbed out, cigarette between his teeth, flashlight in hand. He walked the yard, sweeping the beam across the pallets and drums. Looking for the tires someone had promised on the radio. Nothing. He walked to the loading dock, stepped up onto the planks. They creaked. He shone the light into the back corner, where old tarps and cable spools sat forgotten. Still nothing. Ayers swore under his breath, flicked the cigarette into the gravel, and walked back to the truck. He climbed in, slammed the door, and threw it into reverse. The backup lights flared white in the fog. Jacob waited until the rear tires touched the gravel slope. Then he pulled the come-along, already hooked to the beam's base, and cranked it twice. Fast, sharp, silent. The beam shifted. The bolts pulled free. The gravel slid. Ayers hit the gas, trying to back up onto the dock for one more look. The rear wheels bit into nothing. The edge gave. The truck lurched backward, the bed slamming into the dock face. The timber beam snapped like a dry branch. The dock's corner dropped 6 inches, then a foot, then collapsed entirely as the fill beneath it hemorrhaged into the culvert. The truck went with it, tail first, engine roaring, headlights sweeping up into the fog like searchlights trying to find the sky. The crash was one long note, metal and wood, and the wet crunch of earth taking what it was owed. Then water, rushing over broken boards and bent steel, filling the cab through the shattered rear window. Jacob didn't move. He waited 5 minutes, listening. No voices, no sirens. Just the sound of water and the distant static of a CB radio inside the truck. Still powered, still searching for a signal. He crawled backward, deeper into the shadow of the culvert, then stood and walked north into the timber. He carried the pry bar and the hammer. The come-along he left. It was rusted, unmarked, the kind of thing you'd find at any depot in 3 counties. By 10:45, he was a mile away, walking a ridgeline no one used, except deer and men who didn't want to be seen. 11:03 p.m., Kingdom Come Road, Letcher County. Jonah and Mark sat on the Honda, 100 yards uphill from the curve, engine off, watching the road through the fog. The curve was a hairpin, the kind where you brake at the top, or you don't make it through. On the inside, a rock face. On the outside, a ditch that dropped into darkness. An old bell mine shaft, open since 1962, never capped, never marked, just a hole in the ground that took what fell into it and gave nothing back. Elias had placed 2 cattle panels across the road at the apex of the curve, anchored to a poplar on the uphill side, with logging chain. The panels were hinged. They'd lie flat when hit, looking like they'd fallen from a truck. But they'd make a man brake hard, and on this road, in this fog, braking hard meant sliding. Mark had done the rest. At the base of the curve, where the ditch met the shoulder, he'd spread a layer of pea gravel over the asphalt, just enough to break traction, not enough to see until your tires were already on it. At 11:17, they heard the engine, a V8, running fast, no muffler. Headlights swept the trees, high and wide. A truck with a lift kit, the kind that carried something heavy and illegal. Ray and Porter Childers, the cousins who'd sold the Pritchards counterfeit bills of sale and laughed about it at the diner in Whitesburg. The truck hit the curve at 40, saw the cattle panels, and locked up. Rubber screamed. The rear end kicked out, the tires found the gravel, and the truck slid sideways, passenger door leading, into the ditch. For a moment, it balanced. 2 wheels on the shoulder, 2 in the air, headlights pointing at the stars that weren't there. Then gravity spoke. The truck dropped nose first into the shaft. The sound was a roar, then a crash, then silence. Not even an echo. The earth swallowed it whole. Jonah walked down, pulled the cattle panels off the road, and dragged them into the brush. Mark scattered leaves over the gravel, kicked dirt over the skid marks, and used a pine branch to sweep the shoulder smooth. By 11:34, the road looked like it always had. Empty, dark, forgetting. They rode the Honda north, lights still off, vanishing into the timber before the fog could even thin. 11:52 p.m. Renfro Pond, Bell County. The pond sat in a hollow behind an old dairy farm that had gone under in 1983. It was spring-fed, 30 feet deep in the center, black as oil, even in daylight. Catfish the size of dogs lived down there, feeding on whatever fell in and didn't come back up. Clyde Dutton, the wrecker driver, kept a boat chained to a locust tree on the north bank. He fished there every weekend, always alone, always at night, always with a cooler full of Pabst and a tackle box that smelled like blood and gasoline. Jacob had scouted the pond 3 times. The boat was a 12-foot John boat, aluminum, with an old Evinrude outboard that Dutton never used. He paddled, quiet, keeping the fish calm. The chain that held it was newer than the boat, but not by much. A master lock, the kind you could open with a screwdriver if you knew where to tap. Elias had done something simpler. He'd replaced the boat's drain plug, a rubber stopper the size of a thumb, with one he'd whittled from a poplar branch. It looked identical. It fit snug, but poplar swells in water, slowly. Over about an hour, it would expand, crack, and let go. At 12:03 a.m., Dutton arrived. He climbed out of his wrecker, popped the cooler from the bed, and walked to the tree. He unlocked the chain, dragged the boat to the water, and pushed off. By 12:15, he was in the center of the pond, paddle across his knees. First spear open, rod in the water. By 12:40, his boots were wet. By 1:05, he was standing, looking down at 6 inches of water sloshing in the hull, trying to find the leak with a flashlight that barely worked. By 1:12, the boat was under him, and he was in the pond, thrashing, calling for help that wouldn't come, because there was no one to hear. Clyde Dutton could swim, but the pond was cold, the banks were slick, and the catfish were patient. Elias watched from the ridgeline with binoculars he'd owned since Vietnam. He didn't look away, he didn't pray. He just watched until the flashlight went under and didn't come back up. Then he walked home. Saturday, October 28th, 1989, 12:47 a.m. Cumberland. Bell County Deputy Cason Monroe finished his shift at midnight and drove to the old schoolhouse on Harlan Road. It had been closed since 1979, windows boarded, doors chained, but the payphone in the hallway still worked. Monroe used it twice a week to call a woman named Denise, who worked the register at Food City. His wife didn't know. His wife checked the phone bill. He parked behind the building, out of sight from the road, and walked to the side door. The padlock was open. That was odd. He always had to unlock it. But the door was heavy, warped from years of damp, and he figured the maintenance man had been through. He stepped inside. The hallway smelled like mildew and old textbooks. The payphone hung on the wall near the boiler room door, receiver intact, coin slot stuffed with gum. Monroe dropped a quarter and dialed. It rang 4 times. Denise picked up. "Hey, baby," Monroe said. "Storm's rolling in. You safe?" On the other end, Ruth Pritchard held the phone, said nothing, and hung up. Monroe frowned, hung up, and turned to leave. The door was shut. He tried the handle, locked. He pushed. It didn't budge. "Hello?" he called. Nothing. He walked to the boiler room. The door was open. Inside, a furnace that hadn't run in a decade, and a coal chute that dropped into the basement. Behind him, Jonah stepped from the shadow of the stairwell. Mark came from the side hall. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Monroe turned, saw them, and reached for his belt. Jonah hit him once with a pipe wrench, clean and fast, across the forearm. The bone snapped. The gun hit the floor. Mark kicked it away, grabbed Monroe by the collar, and shoved him toward the boiler room. Monroe fought. He was strong, trained. But Jacob was already there, coming through the basement door, and Jacob was stronger. They put Monroe in the chute. It was narrow, steep, slick with 50 years of coal dust. He slid halfway, wedged, screaming. Jonah didn't touch him. He just opened the valve on the old steam line, the one that still dripped condensation from the water table above. Cold water, slow at first, then faster. It pooled at the bottom of the chute, rising, soaking Monroe's legs, then his waist, then his chest. They left him there. They locked the basement door from the outside. They drove away in Monroe's patrol car, a risk but necessary, and parked it 2 miles away behind a shuttered gas station with the keys under the seat and the radio smashed. By 2 a.m., the water was to Monroe's chin. By 3 a.m., the screaming stopped. Saturday, October 28th, 1989, 9:15 a.m. The Pritchard house. Ruth stood at the stove, making eggs and biscuits. Caleb sat at the table, drawing pictures of trucks. Ada was in the garden, pulling the last of the turnips before the frost came. The house smelled like coffee and bacon grease and normalcy. The phone rang. Ruth answered. Pritchard residence. A woman's voice, shaky. Is Jonah there? He's out. Can I take a message? This is Marlene Dutton. Clyde didn't come home last night. Have you seen him? Ruth's face didn't change. No, ma'am. I haven't. You called the sheriff? I did. They said they'd send someone to the pond. He fishes there sometimes. I'm sure he's fine. Probably fell asleep in the boat. Yeah, probably. Marlene hung up. Ruth set the phone down, turned back to the stove, and flipped the eggs. Caleb looked up. Who was that? Wrong number, baby. Saturday, 2:34 p.m. Strip pit above Lynch, Harlan County. The strip pit was a scar on the mountain, a wound carved in the 70s, and left to rot. High walls dropped 60 feet to a floor of mud and standing water. False ledges jutted out where the seam had collapsed unevenly, looking solid until Waite found the truth. Elias had called the notary, Vernon Mays, from a payphone in Evarts. I got a buyer for the back 40, he'd said. Cash deal. Need you to bring your seal and your book. I'll meet you at the pit above Lynch, 3 o'clock. Mays had agreed. He drove an Oldsmobile Delta 88, burgundy, with a vinyl top and a spare tire that hadn't been checked since Reagan's first term. Jacob was waiting a mile downhill, wrench in hand. When Mays passed, Jacob followed on foot, staying in the trees. At the base of the hill, where the road switchbacked, he stepped out, flagged Mays down, and pointed at the hood. You're leaking coolant, Jacob said. Bad. Mays popped the hood. Jacob had already cut the hose halfway through. It took 30 seconds for the pressure to blow it the rest of the way. Steam billowed. Damn, Mays said. I got a meeting up the hill. You can make it if you go slow. Just keep the RPMs low. Mays nodded, climbed back in, and started up the switchback. The engine ran hot. The temperature needle climbed. At the top of the ridge, where the pit opened on the left, the hose split completely. Steam erupted from under the hood. Mays braked, panicking, and the Oldsmobile rolled backward on the gravel. Elias had pulled the guardrail posts a week earlier, soaked them in kerosene to rot the bases, then set them back in place. They looked whole. They weren't. The Olds hit the rail folded. The car rolled backward, slow and certain, over the edge and into the pit. It landed on a false ledge, balanced for a moment. Then the ledge crumbled, and the car dropped another 20 feet into the silt at the bottom. Mays didn't die in the fall. He died in the mud, trying to open the door, as the silt poured through the broken window and filled the car like wet concrete. Elias watched from the ridge until the roof disappeared. Then he walked away, carrying the notary's seal and book. He'd burn them later, scatter the ashes in Poor Fork Creek. Saturday, 6:47 p.m., Route 119. Bell County Loan Officer Dennis Phelps drove to Lynch every Friday to see his sister. Every Friday, he stopped at the diner for pie. Every Friday, he took Route 119. Same time, same speed, same radio station. His brother-in-law, Carl, rode with him. Carl worked at the bank too, in the back office, processing liens and foreclosures. He's the one who'd pushed the Pritchard case to the top of the pile. Jonah knew the route. He'd driven it 6 times in the last month, noting every curve, every turnout, every tree within 20 feet of the road. He picked an oak, old, thick, leaning slightly toward the pavement. Its root system was undercut by runoff, the trunk held by tension and stubbornness. Mark had rigged a come-along to the trunk on Wednesday, anchored to a poplar 30 feet uphill. The cable was hidden under leaves, the winch tucked into the brush. At 6:52, Phelps's Buick came around the curve. Mark cranked the winch. The oak groaned, cracked, and fell, not onto the road, but 20 feet ahead of it, across both lanes, too wide to swerve around. Phelps braked. The car's front tires bit into gravel that had been raked into marbles. Smooth, loose, invisible until too late. The Buick slid sideways, passenger side leading, into the guardrail. The posts, soaked in kerosene for a week, snapped like matchsticks. The Buick went over the edge, nose first, and dropped 60 feet into a ravine choked with laurel and deadfall. No fire, no explosion, just the sound of metal folding and glass breaking. And then the mountain swallowed it. Mark unhooked the come-along, wrapped it in a tarp, and carried it down the ridge. He'd drop it in a creek 2 counties over. Jonah scattered leaves over the skid marks, kicked the gravel back into the ditch, and walked away. By 7:15, the road was empty again. Saturday, 9:23 p.m. Garage, Whitesburg, Letcher County. Dale Emery was a yard enforcer for Wilkes, a man who collected fees with brass knuckles and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He worked out in a garage behind his mother's house, hitting a heavy bag every night, a ritual born of prison and pride. Jonah knocked on the garage door. Emery opened it, saw a man he didn't know, and stepped back. "Help you." "Tanner sent me. Said you'd have the package." Emery frowned. "What package?" "The one from Harlan. Said you'd know." Emery turned to his workbench, looking for something Jonah had made up. Jonah stepped inside. Mark came through the side door. Emery turned, saw them both, and reached for the bat leaning against the wall. Jonah shot the chain holding the heavy bag. A single 12-gauge slug, close range, deafening in the cinderblock space. The bag dropped, swinging wild, obscuring Emery's vision. Mark stepped behind him, loop of snare wire in hand, and pulled tight. Emery fought. He was strong, but Mark was faster, and Jonah held his arms. It took 45 seconds. They left him in the backseat of his Cutlass. Engine running, garage door closed, a scene that would read like a man who drank too much and fell asleep in a running car and never woke up. They walked out the side door, cutting through the woods behind the house. The shotgun went into Poor Fort Creek, barrel packed with mud, stock smashed with a sledge. Saturday, 11:38 p.m., Way Station, Route 421. The Way Station man, Lyle Corbett, worked alone on Saturdays, skimming weights and pocketing fees. He lived in a trailer behind the scale house, 50 yards from the road, close enough to hear trucks, but far enough to pretend he didn't. Jacob had scouted the trailer. Propane tank on the north side, wood steps on the south, rotted at the base, held up by a single joist. He soaked the joist in kerosene Thursday night, let it dry, soaked it again Friday. By Saturday, it looked fine. It wasn't. At 11:52, Corbett walked out of the scale house, carrying a thermos and a flashlight. He climbed the steps. The joist cracked. The steps collapsed. Corbett fell 6 feet, landing on his back on a sheet of corrugated tin that had been leaning against the foundation. The tin had been sharpened, not obviously, just enough. Corbett bled out in 4 minutes, calling for help no one heard. Jacob watched from the tree line, then walked away. Sunday, October 29th, 1989, 1:14 a.m., Cumberland Gap. The others fell through the night like dominoes. A driver who ghosted hours, found in a car that rolled into a pond after a jack slipped beneath the frame. A cousin who ran errands for Wilkes, drowned in a river ford where a cairn had been moved 2 stones to the left, making the shallow water look deeper than it was. A courier whose canoe plug had been replaced with a dowel that swelled and failed an hour into his midnight run. Each death looked like October, like bad luck, like the mountain asking a question and men giving the wrong answer. By dawn Sunday, 17 men were gone. Sunday, 7:45 a.m. Church, Harlan. The Pritchards sat in the 4th pew, all of them. Elias, Ada, Ruth, Jonah, Jacob, and Mark. Caleb sat between his mother and his grandmother, coloring a picture of a church on the back of a bulletin. Preacher Vance gave a sermon on storms and stillness. "When the wind blows," he said, "the righteous stand firm." No one looked at the Pritchards, but everyone felt them there. After the service, Deacon Harris shook Elias's hand. "Heard there were some accidents this weekend." "I heard that too. Strange, all of them happening at once." "October's a hard month," Elias said. Harris held his gaze for a beat too long, then nodded. "That it is." Sunday, 2:13 p.m. The basement, Avarts. The 18th man was a federal informant named Roger Kephart. He lived in his mother's basement, feeding information to Wilkes in exchange for a cut of the profits and a promise of immunity if things went south. Elias had confirmed his identity by watching him meet with a man in a suit at a rest stop on I-75. The suit drove a government sedan. The conversation lasted 12 minutes. Kephart walked away with an envelope. Elias didn't need to see inside the envelope. He knew. Sunday afternoon, Elias knocked on the front door. Kephart's mother answered, a woman in her 70s with soft eyes and a voice like paper. Is Roger home? He's downstairs. Who should I say is calling? Tell him it's about the hauling contract. She disappeared. A minute later, Kephart came up the stairs, wary, a man who'd spent too long looking over his shoulder. Elias didn't give him time to speak. He stepped inside, closed the door, and walked Kephart back down the stairs at gunpoint. The Ruger 357, never fired in anger, loaded with 6 rounds that had been in the box since 1979. In the basement, Elias asked one question. How much did Wilkes pay you to tell him which families to target? Kephart tried to lie. Elias didn't let him finish. 1 round, close range, into the furnace behind Kephart. The sound was deafening. Kephart dropped to his knees. Next one's not a warning, Elias said. Kephart talked. He gave names, dates, amounts. He admitted he'd flagged the Pritchards because they had land worth taking. Elias listened. Then he shot Kephart once, through the heart, and left him on the basement floor. He walked upstairs, past the mother, who was watching television and hadn't heard a thing over the volume, and out the front door. He drove home, stripped the Ruger, dropped the barrel in one creek, the cylinder in another, and the frame in a third. The bullets he'd fired were untraceable. Common rounds, no rifling match without the barrel, 18 down, 1 to go. Sunday, 8:34 p.m. The Pritchard house. They sat around the kitchen table. No one spoke. Ruth made coffee. Ada folded laundry. The boys stared at their hands. Elias opened the composition book and crossed out 18 names. At the bottom, 1 name remained, Tanner Wilkes. Jonah looked up. When? Not yet, Elias said. He needs to know. He needs to hear the names. He needs to understand what he did. And then we finish it. Mark's voice was quiet. What if he runs? Elias closed the book. He won't. Men like Wilkes don't run. They double down. Monday, October 30th, 1989. Morning. The first body was found at dawn. Boyd Ayers, still in his truck, half submerged in the culvert behind the Grigsby Depot. The sheriff called it an accident. Bad doc, bad luck. By noon, they'd found 3 more, the cousins in the mine shaft, Clyde Dutton floating in the pond, Deputy Monroe in the schoolhouse basement, drowned in 6 inches of water. By evening, the count was 9. By Wednesday, 17. The state police came. They spread maps, drew circles, asked questions, but every death had a different cause. Every scene had a different story, no pattern, no thread. One detective stood in the Harlan County Sheriff's Office, staring at the map, and said, 17. Accidents in 3 counties in 4 days. That's not coincidence. The sheriff looked at him. Then what is it? The detective didn't answer. Because he didn't know. Thursday, November 2nd, 1989, 11:52 p.m. Tanner Wilkes sat in his Silverado outside a bar in Whitesburg, engine running, hands shaking. He'd heard the names, all of them, men he'd worked with, men he'd paid, men who'd helped him build an empire of lies and stolen contracts. Gone. Every one of them. He knew it wasn't random. He knew someone was coming. He just didn't know when. He started the truck and drove toward Poor Fork, toward the Pritchard house, toward the men he thought he'd beaten. He never made it. At the curve above the old mine cut, the fog was thick. The road was narrow, and someone had moved the guardrail just enough. Wilkes saw the gap too late. He braked. The truck slid, and the mountain took him the way it had taken the others, quietly, completely, and without mercy. Friday, November 3rd, 1989, dawn. Elias stood on his porch with his coffee, watching the fog lift. Ada came out, stood beside him. Is it done? She asked. It's done. She nodded. Then we don't speak of it again. No, we don't. Inside, the composition book sat in the stove, burning. 19 names turning to ash, turning to smoke, turning to nothing. The mountain had taken what it was owed, and the Pritchards had paid what they owed the mountain. Friday, November 3rd, 1989, 8:17 a.m. The call came into the Harlan County Sheriff's Office at dawn. A logger heading up Route 421 had seen chrome in the ravine above Poor Fork. A bumper, maybe, catching the first light. Sheriff Wade Tackett sent Deputy Frank Osborne and a wrecker from Lynch. By 9, they'd confirmed it. Tanner Wilkes's Silverado, nose down in a 40-foot drop. Driver's side door crumpled against a poplar that had probably saved the truck from rolling all the way to the creek. Wilkes was still inside, seatbelt on, neck broken clean. The steering wheel was bent where his chest had hit it. No skid marks on the road. No signs of another vehicle. Just a gap in the guardrail where the posts had rotted through, and a curve that had killed 3 men in the last decade. Deputy Osborne radioed it in. Single vehicle. Looks like he missed the curve. Fog probably didn't help. Sheriff Tackett stood in his office, staring at the county map on the wall. 19 red pushpins, each one marking a death in the last 7 days. He pulled a pencil from behind his ear and tapped it against the desk. "Frank," he said into the radio, "that makes 19. Static, then. 19 what? Deaths, accidents, whatever the hell you want to call them. 19 men in 7 days across 3 counties. Osborne didn't respond right away. When he did, his voice was careful. "You saying they're connected? I'm saying I don't believe in coincidence. What do you want me to do?" Tackett looked at the map. Harlan, Letcher, Bell. A triangle of mountain country where the law had always been a suggestion more than a rule, where feuds simmered for generations, and sometimes boiled over in ways that never made the papers. "Bring the truck in," Tackett said. "I'll call the state. Friday, 10:43 a.m. Kentucky. State Police. London Detachment. Detective Sergeant Raymond Coulter took the call at his desk, a styrofoam cup of coffee going cold beside a stack of incident reports. He listened to Tackett's summary. 19 men, 7 days, 3 counties, no clear connection except geography and bad luck. "You think it's foul play?" Coulter asked. "I think 19 accidents in a week is a pattern pretending to be chaos. Any witnesses?" "None. Every scene's clean. Every death's got a reasonable explanation, if you look at it alone. Together, it's..." Tackett trailed off. "It's what?" "It's someone who knows these roads better than God." Coulter pulled a legal pad and started writing. "Give me the names." Tackett read them off. Boyd Ayers, Ray, and Porter Childers, Clyde Dutton, Deputy Cason Monroe, Vernon Mays, Dennis Phelps, Carl Phelps, Dale Emery, Lyle Corbett. 6 more Coulter didn't recognize. Drivers, clerks, a courier, a brother-in-law, a county recorder. Roger Kephart and Tanner Wilkes. What connected them? Coulter asked. Most of them worked with Wilkes, hauling, logistics, something coal-related. A few were county officials. Monroe was one of ours. Coulter underlined Monroe's name twice. A deputy dying was different. A deputy dying in a locked school basement, drowned in 6 inches of water, was a problem. "I'll be there by noon," Coulter said. Friday, 2:34 p.m. Harlan County Sheriff's Office. Detective Coulter spread the incident reports across Tackett's desk. 19 files. 19 different causes of death. Drowning, blunt force trauma, asphyxiation, vehicular, accidental, accidental, accidental. "Every coroner called it an accident," Coulter said. "Every scene investigator found a reasonable cause. Rotted dock, open mine shaft, defective boat plug, faulty steps, bad road, bad weather, bad luck." "But," Tackett asked, "but someone had to know where these men would be. Someone had to know their schedules, their routes, their habits." Coulter tapped the map. "You can't kill 19 men in 7 days by accident. This was planned." "By who?" "That's what I'm here to find out." Coulter pulled a clean sheet of paper and drew a timeline. Friday night, Ayers, the Childers cousins, Dutton, Monroe. Saturday, Mays, Phelps, and his brother-in-law, Emery, Corbett, 4 others. Sunday, Kephart, and 3 more. Monday, Wilkes. 2 primary nights, Coulter said. Friday and Saturday. The rest trickle in through Sunday and Monday, probably to avoid pattern recognition. Whoever did this spread it out just enough to make it look random. Or it is random. Coulter looked at him. "You believe that?" "No," Tackett admitted. "But I don't know what I believe." "Then let's start with motive. What connected these men besides Wilkes?" Tackett opened a drawer and pulled out a file folder. Complaints, most of them dismissed or unresolved. Wilkes ran a hauling operation, contracted with independent drivers. There were accusations, breach of contract, skimmed weights, stolen equipment, extortion. Most complainants dropped it or left the county. "Any names stand out?" Tackett flipped through the pages and stopped on one. A formal complaint filed Monday, October 23rd, 8 days before the deaths began, signed by Elias Pritchard, Poor Fork, Kentucky, alleging breach of contract, fraud, and collusion with county officials. Coulter read it twice. Where's this Pritchard now? Home, I'd guess. He's been there for 40 years, runs a small place up the hollow, family man, Vietnam vet, quiet. Quiet men make the most noise when they finally break, Coulter said. Let's go talk to him. Friday, 4:18 p.m. The Pritchard house. Elias was splitting wood when the unmarked Chevrolet Caprice rolled up the gravel drive. He didn't stop. He set another log on the stump, raised the maul, and brought it down clean. The log split with a crack that echoed off the ridgeline. Detective Coulter climbed out first, Sheriff Tackett behind him. Both men wore jackets against the cold. Temperature had dropped to 39, the sky the color of old steel. Elias Pritchard? Coulter asked. That's right. I'm Detective Sergeant Coulter, Kentucky State Police. This is Sheriff Tackett. We'd like to ask you a few questions. Elias set the maul against the stump and wiped his hands on his jeans. About what? About Tanner Wilkes. Elias looked at him, face neutral, eyes steady. What about him? He's dead. Drove off Route 421 last night. We're trying to piece together what happened. Sounds like he missed a curve. He did, along with 18 other men in the last week. Elias didn't blink. That's a shame. Coulter stepped closer. You filed a complaint against Wilkes 2 weeks ago. Breach of contract. Fraud. That's a serious accusation. It was a serious breach. Did he ever respond? No. Did you try to contact him? I tried. He didn't answer. That make you angry? Elias picked up the maul, set another log on the stump. It made me broke. Anger doesn't pay the bills. Where were you last Friday night? Coulter asked. Here? All night? All night? Can anyone confirm that? Elias split the log. My wife, my daughter, my sons were in and out. We had family supper. What time did your sons leave? Late, maybe 10. Where'd they go? Home. Jonah's got a trailer down the road. Jacob's got a place in town. Mark stays with a friend in Everett sometimes. And Saturday? Same. Church on Sunday. We're here most days. Not much reason to leave. Coulter pulled a notepad from his jacket. You know Boyd Ayers? I know the name. Vernon Mays? Notary. Used him once or twice. Deputy Cason Monroe. Met him at the courthouse when I filed the complaint. Dennis Phelps? Elias? Paused, just for a second. He's the loan officer at First Cumberland. Handles our mortgage. Handles, Coulter said. Present tense. You know he's dead. I heard something about accidents. Didn't know the details. Coulter watched him. Elias's face didn't change. His hands didn't shake. His voice didn't waver. If he was lying, he was the best liar Coulter had ever seen. Mr. Pritchard, Coulter said, 19 men died in 7 days. Most of them had a connection to Tanner Wilkes. You had a grudge against Wilkes. You filed a legal complaint that went nowhere. And now, conveniently, everyone who wronged you is dead. Elias met his eyes. Detective, I'm a 60-year-old man with a bad back and a mortgage I can't pay. You think I drove around 3 counties in the fog killing people? I think someone did. Then you should find them. I intend to. Elias set the maul down and walked toward the house. If you want to talk more, you're welcome to come back with a warrant. Otherwise, I've got work to do. Coulter called after him. We'll be checking your vehicles, your tools, your whereabouts. If you had anything to do with this, we'll find it. Elias stopped at the porch steps and turned. Detective, if I'd done something wrong, you'd already have found it. The fact that you're here asking questions means you've got nothing. He went inside and closed the door. Friday, 6:52 p.m., Harlan County Sheriff's Office. Coulter paced the small conference room, frustration bleeding through his professional calm. Tackett sat at the table, arms crossed, watching. He's lying, Coulter said. Maybe. No, maybe. He's lying. I can feel it. Feeling's not evidence. Then let's get evidence. Run his vehicles. Check for fresh bodywork, fresh mud, anything that puts him or his family on those roads that weekend. Tackett pulled a file. Already did. Jacob Pritchard owns a Dodge pickup. Registered. Inspected. Jonah doesn't own a vehicle. Walks most places or borrows. Mark's got a Honda motorcycle. Plates expired. No insurance. Ruth drives an Impala. Elias drives a '78 Ford F-150. And And none of them show up on any traffic stops, any gas station cameras, any toll records. We pulled CB logs from the repeaters, nothing that matches. We checked payphone records, nothing suspicious except one call to a Food City cashier that matches the time Monroe would have been at the schoolhouse. But the call came from the clinic where Ruth Pritchard works. So Ruth called Monroe's girlfriend to lure him there. Or someone used the clinic phone without her knowing. Or it's a coincidence. Coulter slammed his hand on the table. I don't believe in coincidence. Tackett leaned back. Then prove it. Because right now, all you've got is a man who filed a legal complaint and a lot of dead people who probably deserved it. Coulter stared at him. You think they deserved it? Tackett was quiet for a long moment. I think Tanner Wilkes was a con man. I think Boyd Ayers took bribes. I think Deputy Monroe looked the other way when money talked. I think half the men on that list were dirty, and the other half were stupid. He met Coulter's eyes. I think someone decided the law wasn't going to handle it, so they handled it themselves. That's not justice. No, Tackett agreed. But it's what happens when justice doesn't show up. Saturday, November 4, 1989, 9 a.m., the Pritchard house. Ruth was hanging laundry on the line when she saw the state police cruiser coming up the drive again. She didn't run. She didn't call inside. She just kept pinning shirts and jeans to the line, moving steady, calm, like a woman with nothing to hide. Detective Coulter got out, this time with a second detective, a woman, mid-40s, sharp eyes, nameplate reading Detective L. Klein. Miss Pritchard, Coulter said. Mrs. technically, but Ruth's fine. We need to ask you some questions. Ruth picked up another shirt. About what? About the phone call made from Cumberland Clinic to a woman named Denise Harmon on Friday, October 27th, at approximately 12:40 a.m. Ruth didn't hesitate. I work at the clinic. I don't monitor the phones after hours. The call was made from the nurse's station. You were on shift. I was. But I was in the supply room doing inventory. Anyone could have used that phone. Who else was there? 2 other nurses, a janitor, a patient's husband waiting in the hall. Could have been any of them. Detective Klein stepped forward. Mrs. Pritchard, that call lured Deputy Monroe to a location where he died. If you made that call, you're an accessory to murder. Ruth looked at her. I didn't make the call. I didn't kill anyone. And unless you have evidence that says otherwise, I'd appreciate it if you'd let me finish my laundry. Klein pulled a photograph from her jacket. A still frame from a traffic camera on Route 421, grainy and dark, showing a motorcycle without plates passing through the frame at 11:52 p.m. on Friday, October 27th. Recognize this bike? Ruth glanced at it. Could be any bike. Can't even see the rider. Your brother Mark owns a Honda motorcycle. Plates expired. Matches the profile. Lots of people own Hondas. Lots of people don't keep their plates current. Where was Mark that night? Home, I think. Or with friends. I don't keep a schedule for him. Coulter pulled a second photo, a receipt from a Shell station in Bell County, dated October 26th, showing a purchase of 15 gallons of diesel, paid in cash, no name. But the timestamp was 4:47 p.m., and the pump was number 3. We pulled surveillance from the station. Guess whose truck was at pump 3? Ruth didn't look. I don't know. Whose? We can't tell. Camera was broken. Funny how that happens. Ruth picked up the laundry basket. Detectives, if you want to keep talking, you're going to need a warrant or a lawyer present. Otherwise, I've got a son to feed and a shift at the clinic tonight. She walked toward the house. Klein called after her. We know your family did this. We just can't prove it yet, but we will. Ruth stopped at the door and turned. Then I guess you better keep looking. She went inside. Saturday, 3:21 p.m. Interview room, Harlan County Sheriff's Office. They brought Jonah in next. Voluntary, they said. Just want to ask a few questions. He came alone. No lawyer, no fear. Coulter sat across from him, file open. You were a brakeman on the L&N line, that right? Was, till the coal stopped moving. So you know trains, you know schedules, you know how to move through territory without being seen. I know how to couple cars and check air brakes. That's about it. Where were you Friday night, October 27th? Home. All night, all night. Your trailer's a mile from your father's house. Anyone see you? No, I live alone. Convenient, Jonah shrugged. It's the truth. Coulter slid a photo across the table. The cattle panels that had been found in the brush near Kingdom Come Road. scratches on the asphalt where they had been dragged. Know what these are? Cattle panels. They were found near the site where Ray and Porter Childers died. Someone put them on the road, made them break hard, made them slide into a mine shaft. Jonah looked at the photo. That's a shame. You don't seem surprised. I'm not. Those boys drove like idiots. Everyone knew they'd end up in a ditch eventually. Except this wasn't a ditch. This was a 100-foot shaft, and someone made sure they found it. Then you should find that someone. Coulter leaned forward. Your family had a grudge against Wilkes, against the men who worked with him. Your father filed a complaint. You lost your job because of the coal collapse. You had motive. Jonah met his eyes. Motive's not evidence. No, but opportunity is. And you had that too. Jonah stood. Am I under arrest? No. Then I'm leaving. He walked out. Sunday, November 5th, 1989. Church, Harlan. The Pritchards sat in the 4th pew. The same pew they'd sat in for 40 years. Elias, Ada, Ruth, Jonah, Jacob, Mark, and Caleb. Detective Coulter sat in the back, watching. Preacher Vance gave a sermon on vengeance. Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. It is not for man to repay evil with evil, but to trust in the justice of the Almighty. No one turned around. No one looked at the Pritchards, but everyone knew why the detective was there. After the service, Deacon Harris shook Elias's hand on the steps. Heard the state police been asking questions. They have. You need anything? No, we're fine. Harris lowered his voice. Elias, if you did something, if your family did something, there's not a soul in this county who'd blame you. Elias looked at him. I didn't do anything. Good, Harris said. Then you got nothing to worry about. But his eyes said something different. They said, I know, and I'll never tell. Monday, November 6th, 1989. State Police Barracks, London. Detective Coulter sat in Lieutenant Marsh's office. His report spread across the desk. 19 deaths, 3 counties, 7 days, 0 evidence. You got nothing, Marsh said. I've got motive, opportunity, and a family that benefits from every single death. But no weapon, no witnesses, no physical evidence, no forensics. Because they were smart. They used the roads. They used the weather. They used tools that can't be traced. Marsh closed the file. Then you've got a theory, and theories don't convict. So we just let them walk? We investigate until there's nothing left to investigate, and then we move on. Marsh looked at him. Ray, I know this sticks in your throat, but sometimes people get away with it. Sometimes the bad guys win, and sometimes, he paused, sometimes the bad guys are the ones who end up dead, and the people who killed them go to church on Sunday and sleep fine at night. That's not justice. No, Marsh agreed, but it might be what these mountains need. Tuesday, November 7th, 1989, Cumberland Clinic. Ruth was wrapping a sprained wrist when Detective Klein walked in. She didn't announce herself. She just stood in the doorway, watching. When Ruth finished, she walked over. Can I help you, Detective? I wanted to see where you work, wanted to see the phone. Ruth gestured to the nurse's station. There it is. Klein walked over, picked up the receiver, set it down. You made the call. I didn't. I think you did. I think you lured Deputy Monroe to that schoolhouse. I think your brothers were waiting, and I think you've been living with that for 2 weeks. Ruth's face didn't change. Think what you want. I know what I did and didn't do. How do you sleep at night? Ruth met her eyes. Same as you, I imagine. One eye open, hoping the world makes sense in the morning. Klein stared at her for a long moment. Then she turned and walked out. November 15th, 1989. The Pritchard House. The certified letter arrived. This time, it wasn't from the bank. It was from the estate of Tanner Wilkes, in receivership, liquidating assets to settle debts. Among the debts, payments owed to 5 families for hauling contracts unfulfilled. The Pritchards were owed $4,200. The check was inside. Elias held it in his hands, staring at the signature. An attorney he'd never met. A man tasked with cleaning up a dead man's mess. Ada stood beside him. Are you going to cash it? I don't know. It's what we're owed. It's blood money. It's survival. Elias looked at her. What do you want me to do? Ada took the check, folded it, and put it in her purse. I want you to pay the mortgage. I want you to buy Caleb's medicine. I want you to keep this family whole. She walked to the kitchen. Elias stood on the porch, watching the fog roll in. December 1989. The investigation closes. Detective Coulter filed his final report. 19 deaths, accidental, misadventure, undetermined, no charges recommended. The case was closed, not for lack of suspicion, but for lack of proof. The state police quietly noted the Pritchard family as persons of interest, but no warrants were issued, no arrests made. Sheriff Tackett called it a bad month in a hard county. Preacher Vance called it the judgment of God. The mountain called it nothing. It just kept standing. Spring 1990. The cost comes due. The Pritchards kept the house. They paid the bank. They bought seed and flour and medicine. But the cost came in quieter ways. Jacob drank. Not every day, but enough. He'd sit in his truck at night, staring at his hands, seeing things no one else could see. He went to AA in Pikeville, stayed sober for months, then fell off again. He never married. He never had children. He died in 2003, liver cirrhosis, 53 years old. Jonah stayed. He worked odd jobs, fixed fences, sat with dying men who had no one else. He never spoke about October 1989. He never married. He lived alone in the trailer until 2017, when he had a heart attack splitting wood. He was found 3 days later by a neighbor who noticed the mail piling up. Mark left. He moved to Knoxville in 1991, got a job as a surveyor, sent postcards with no return address. He came home for Ada's funeral in 2006 and Elias's in 2013, stayed an hour each time, and left. No one knows where he is now. Ruth stayed. She worked at the clinic until she retired in 2015. She raised Caleb, who became a paramedic and moved to Lexington. Every October, she lights 2 candles on the kitchen stove, one for mercy, one for judgment. She never says why. Elias lived until 2013. He died in his sleep, 80 years old, on the porch of the house his grandfather built. At his funeral, Deacon Harris gave the eulogy. Elias Pritchard was a man who loved his family, loved his land, and loved his God. He did what he thought was right, and he carried the weight of that until the day he died. They buried him next to Ada under the hickory tree on the ridge overlooking Poor Fork. The marbled composition book was found in a cedar chest after his death. Inside, a recipe for cornbread, a pressed wildflower, and a verse from Micah 6:8, underlined 3 times. The list of 19 names was gone. 2019, 30 years later, a drought drops the water level in the strip pit above Lynch. A boy, fishing from the bank, casts out and snags something chrome. His uncle cuts the line, ties on a new hook, doesn't look at what's beneath the water. A hiker on Kingdom Come Road finds a rusted cattle panel in the brush, half buried, strange scratches on the nearby asphalt that could be anything. A historian researching Appalachian labor movements stumbles onto a footnote in a Bell County coroner's report. 19 deaths in 7 days, October 1989, all ruled accidental. He tries to FOIA the investigative files. The request is denied. The records are sealed. He drives to Harlan, to Poor Fork, to the hollow where the Pritchard house still stands. Ruth answers the door. She's 74 now, hair white, hands steady. I'm researching a series of deaths that occurred in 1989. The historian says, I was hoping you could tell me what you remember. Ruth looks at him for a long moment. I remember it was a hard October. A lot of men died. A lot of families grieved. Do you think there was more to it than accidents? I think the roads up here are dangerous. I think men make bad choices. I think the mountain doesn't forgive mistakes. But do you think someone... Ruth cuts him off. I think you should respect the dead and let them rest. She closes the door. Why the mountain chose silence? Because every widow that winter received an envelope with $300 cash and a note for heat. No name, no return address. Just the money and the kindness. Because 2 boys whose father was on the list, Dale Emery's sons, grew up without his fists, without his anger, and became men who didn't hit. Because a church roof in Poor Fork got new shingles in November 1989. The work done overnight, no contractor hired, no bill ever sent, because a clinic in Cumberland got an anonymous donation in December that paid for medicine for 12 families who couldn't afford it. Because men remembered what it felt like when Tanner Wilkes laughed at them on the courthouse steps, and they decided there are some laughs you answer, and sometimes the answer is to shut the road itself. Because the law was 40 miles away and wouldn't come when called. Because a family decided that honor mattered more than legality and blood mattered more than law. Because the mountain keeps its secrets, and the people who live there know some things are better left unspoken. Who greased the schoolhouse coal chute? Who moved the cairnstones at the river ford? Who was Sawhorse on the CB? The voice that called for help and gave directions that led nowhere. Whether the 19th man was Tanner Wilkes or someone else. Someone in a suit who drove down from Frankfurt and never told his boss he came to the hills. Whether the ledger Ruth burned held 20 names instead of 19, and who the 20th might have been. Whether Elias Pritchard, sitting in that recliner on the porch every morning for 24 years, was a man at peace or a man haunted. Whether justice was served or merely stolen from the hands of the law and placed in the hands of the mountain. On Sunday mornings, fog still rolls through poor Fork Hollow. The church bell rings. Families sit in the same pews their grandparents sat in. They sing the same hymns. They pray the same prayers. And when the sermon turns to justice, to mercy, to the hard choices men must make when the law looks away, they listen, and they remember, and they say nothing. Because some stories aren't told, they're lived, and the living carry them to the grave. In 2006, a federal audit of Kentucky coal contracts uncovered irregularities in Harlan, Letcher, and Bell counties dating back to the 1980s. Tanner Wilkes' name appeared on 14 flagged contracts. Boyd Ayers received payments from 6 shell companies. Deputy Cason Monroe's bank records showed deposits that didn't match his salary. None of it was prosecuted. The statute of limitations had expired. The witnesses were dead. In 2011, the old strip pit above Lynch was finally capped and reclaimed. During the work, heavy equipment operators found the remains of 3 vehicles, 2 bodies, and a lockbox containing $53,000 in cash and a ledger with 96 names. The ledger was turned over to the FBI. It was marked as evidence, cataloged, and quietly buried in a storage facility in Louisville. No charges were filed. In 2018, a journalist from the Lexington Herald-Leader wrote a feature on unsolved crimes in Appalachia. She devoted 3 paragraphs to the October accidents of 1989, noting that while the deaths were ruled accidental, local lore suggests a different story, one of retribution, family honor, and a code older than the counties themselves. She tried to interview Ruth Pritchard. Ruth declined. She tried to find Mark Pritchard. He couldn't be located. She tried to access the sealed investigative files. Her request was denied. The article ran on page A14. No one followed up. Ruth Pritchard sits on the porch of the house her grandfather built, the house her father saved, the house that cost 19 men their lives. She holds a cup of coffee. The steam rises and disappears into the morning fog. A car pulls up, a rental, out-of-state plates. A young man climbs out, camera around his neck, notepad in hand. "Mrs. Pritchard," he calls, "I'm writing a book about unsolved cases in Appalachia. I'd love to talk to you about October 1989. Ruth sips her coffee. She watches him walk closer. She sees the eagerness in his face, the hunger for truth, for story, for the secrets the mountain holds. She sets down the cup. "Young man," she says, "the mountain doesn't give up its secrets to people with cameras and notebooks. It gives them up to the people who live here, who stay here, who understand that some things are heavier than words. But don't you think people deserve to know?" Ruth stands. "I think people deserve to mind their business. I think 19 men made choices that cost them their lives. I think a family did what they thought was right. And I think you should leave before you ask a question you don't want answered." The young man hesitates. "Did your family kill those men?" Ruth looks at him for a long time. Then she smiles, a sad, tired smile that's seen too much and said too little. "Young man, if my family had killed 19 men, do you really think I'd be standing here talking to you?" She goes inside. The door closes. The lock turns. The young man stands on the gravel, staring at the house, the ridge. The fog that never quite lifts. He gets back in his car. He drives away. The mountain forgets him before he reaches the county line.